Hey everyone, welcome to our Unit Masters session number 8. We're really privileged and lucky to be here with Daniel Stammler. He's the CEO and founder of Kolibri Games. It's an amazing gaming company based in Berlin. I've played with a few of their games. One of them is called Idle Miner Tycoon, which is a really fun game. And I started playing it maybe 2 weeks ago, and I was amazed in terms of how fun it was. And he's done an incredible job in terms of building it to like a platform and product being used by over 112 million users around the world. So I'm really excited to hear from his experience and feedback and journeys and being an entrepreneur, creator, and a leader for so many people, and building something which has provided entertainment and fun to a large number of people around the world. And I also think that the game does have some entrepreneurial aspects. So really excited to hear his thoughts and feedbacks. And everyone, please welcome Daniel.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for giving me this opportunity to talk today. My idea was a bit to share our journey to hopefully have some learnings and even more important, some motivation for you to engage yourself, to push, to work hard on your dreams. Maybe a few words about me before we go into our story. So I'm Daniel, co-CEO actually and co-founder, and we are three founders. Me and Janos, we share the CEO role, and we have Oliver, our CTO. He's taking care, obviously, of the more technical, advanced topics. Cool. So today I want to talk a bit about how we came to quite a good exit for us, and what we learned, how we did it, and also one of the maybe most interesting parts was how we did this all without having any investor, because most of the companies of our size do have investors. And this is, I think, one thing that makes us more or less unique within the gaming space. Cool. So let's talk a bit about our beginning and why we actually founded the company, what our motivation was. So basically, from the very get-go in the university, we wanted to build something. I always knew that, at least once I started studying, that I don't want to become like a normal employee or something, but I want to build something big. I want to build something that not only like enables me to have a comfortable life, but something that really stays there in a long time, 10, 20, 30 years, and also something that makes people happy, basically. And so we started from the very beginning to build companies. At the first start, I think first try was like 20 or so. And of course, I had no idea what I did, and it obviously didn't work out. But I became better. I learned. I was very self-reflective in what I didn't do well, and so I kept going and going. And eventually, we were looking for, okay, what are we going to do next? So Janos and I were thinking about, should we build like, I don't know, another job portal, or should we go somewhere into the B2B space? But we decided that we want to go into gaming, and for mainly two reasons. One reason was because we thought this is a good business opportunity. Mobile gaming, I believe, is the future. More and more people do have mobile devices, and I think people will always play games. They did this 2000 years ago. Every animal plays games. I think playing games is so natural to people. The only thing that changes is how they play games, and we believe in the future the main way to play games, and by now it's already the biggest part of the market, will be mobile games. However, at the other side, which was also important for us, is of course we love playing games. We played games as kids. We think we have quite a good feeling for games. So we had basically a feeling for the market from the consumer side. And this gave us the confidence that we will be able to actually build a game that people want to play, not only a game that sounds good on paper, and at the same time also be successful with that from a financial perspective. And luckily, it worked out. We started with Kolibri Games in February 2016, and ended up building a game with Idle Miner Tycoon, which is still our main game, that has, I think, by now like 120 million downloads and quite a good success. Cool. So actually, this was one of the first pictures that we had in our student flat. As you see, this is not a very comfortable flat. But for us, it was very important to, before we, I don't know, rent an office or whatever, to start humble. So this was Janos and my apartment. We had 3 rooms, one room where Janos stayed, one room where I basically slept, and this was our living room. And at some point, like when we had, for example, job interviews for internships, we did this in my Ariana's room, which was a bit awkward because there was like a bed in the background and so on. But for us, it was very important to start and to build a product that people want to play first, people want to interact with before we did like all the corporate stuff, which of course is important at some point. But I think like having an office and having a corporate culture is not important to have the very first product, the very first MVP. So, and the second important lesson for us was that if you want to start a new company, you need to say no to a lot of things. And in gaming, of course, if you think of the game, once we had the idea of Idle Miner Tycoon, there were so many things that we wanted to build, so many ideas for the game, so many features where we were certain that they will improve the game experience. At the same time, it was very clear for us that we need to start something where we can see in like 2 months or so, maybe a bit longer, but not much longer, if this whole thing that we're doing has the potential to be successful, or if we should stop doing what we do and pivot into something new. So we had to say no to a lot of the things that are really standard in mobile games nowadays. So for example, we had no 3D artwork, no social features. The game was only in English, no in-app purchases, and no ad mediation. So basically no way to actually earn money. The game was finished after a few days, and also no cloud save, which means basically when people delete the game, it was lost. And those are all features that are super normal to have in a game. But for us, the key thinking was we don't need to know if we're able to monetize the game. We don't need to know if like we can translate the game to German or not, because it was quite obvious that this is just work that we need to do, but doesn't give us the feedback if we should continue or not, but really focus on what matters in the game, which was the core of the game, which is what made it different to other products. And I still believe in this like basically lean startup method, where you really need to think a lot about what is the key differentiation for your product, what will make your product fail or not fail, and you start with that. And if it fails, you pivot. If it doesn't fail, then you do all those stuff that are all those things that are a lot of work but are basically clear wins. Luckily, with Idle Miner Tycoon, it then worked out. We built a game that out of it worked. Before moving to Berlin, actually, we then moved into a real office in Karlsruhe, where we studied back then. I'm not sure if a lot of you guys know Karlsruhe, but it's a student town in South Germany. It's very conservative. It has very good talent, very technology oriented. But then for us as a company in 2016, we realized, okay, if we want to build an international company, if we want to scale, we need to move out of Karlsruhe and move to Berlin. So that's what we did back then. When we moved at the end of the year, we were already 30 people, I think 32 people. Most of them, 30 out of 32 moved with us to Berlin, which was super cool for us because it basically showed us that they actually believe in the company. I mean, the distance from Karlsruhe to Berlin is like 600 kilometers, so it's basically at the other end of Germany. So this was quite a good feeling, and for us, it was definitely the right decision because we knew that this is better for us in the long run. Then in 2019, this was a big year for us. We reached 100 million downloads, and we reached 100 people in the team. And of course, like everything went really fast from 2016 with a few people in the student department, with 100 people in 2019, where we had like a real company where you need to do all those corporate things that a lot of people do not like, but you basically have to do them if you want to be able to deliver games and updates to your players. Then 2020, the most important year so far for us and the biggest change for us, we decided to join Ubisoft and exit most of our shares. For us, of course, personally, it was important because we have more security now, but I think it was also the right step for us as a company in professionalizing, because of course a company like Ubisoft with offices all over the world, with a lot of gaming experience. I think they're there for 35 years now or so. It was now with this decision, we basically made clear that Kolibri will exist in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 years. No matter what we do, Kolibri itself as a company will stay. Okay, this was basically a short run through where we came from in our story. Now let's talk a bit about our challenges and a few certain points that I decided would be very interesting for you today. So we decided to focus on 3 things: business model, then the development approach with games as a service, and then our decision-making process. Let's talk first about our business model. So for those of you who play mobile games, I probably know this already. But in general, mobile games tend to have in-app purchases, they tend to have advertisement, and some have both. So there are some games that only have in-app purchases, like Clash of Clans, for example. They tend to be more like on the high-end side. And there are some games that only have advertisements that are like quick games to play, where you probably wouldn't spend money on, but where a lot of people play. And for Idle Miner Tycoon, we decided to have both and to target basically both audiences with advertisements. We target every player with in-app purchases. Actually, only like 1% of people spend, which is a super small amount, which means that 99% of our players never spend anything in the game. But on the other side, this 1%, there are some people who spend quite a lot of money. So basically, in the end, for us, it's 50-50. And for us, having a well-distributed or having basically two important sources is super good because it brings stability. Even if there are some issues with in-app purchases or with advertisement, we always have the other side to compensate for that. And the most important part about our business model is that it's free to play. So you can download the game without paying anything. And this is obviously very important to reach a big audience. And you can see this trend all over gaming where companies and now also more and more on PC move towards free to play because there are not a lot of people, for example, on PC who want to spend 50, 60, 70 euros upfront unless you are FIFA or GTA. But if you're able to convince them to try it for free and then they like it, then they buy skins or features or game modes or whatever. The second important aspect is games as a service. So most people that think of games think in a way where you build a game, you release it, then that's done, you move on to the next game. Actually, the reality is completely the opposite. As you remember from earlier, the first game, the first version that we built didn't even have monetization. So we weren't even able to earn any money from it, and the game was super small, super crappy. And for us, what we did since then, we shipped over 300 updates. So we shipped one update every week. Some weeks even 2 updates because we had to fix a bug that we released before. But we just kept going and going and going and going, really like a well-oiled machine. And it really works out because with that approach, we were able to keep players in the game, people that played the game in the beginning, and they know there will be a new update every week. So they stuck around, they see what's new, they enjoy it, and they keep playing. And this also means from a production standpoint that actually the people that work on the product, the number increases and doesn't decrease once it's released. So the release is basically only like the very first start, and then we keep going and going and going. And it's very hard to be fast enough because there are from like so many players, there are always some players that are really hardcore that play the game a lot. I saw like on Reddit, there are some people who basically build simulators for the game to optimize their strategy. And we need to ship more and more content for them to also stay engaged because usually those are the most important players as they tend to spend more than others and tend to play more than others. So it's really hard to ship so many updates and keep on top. But I think having this mentality was one of our key reasons for our success, to basically treat the game not as a product that you build, ship, move on, but to treat the game as a service that you start very little and then over time build up. And the third aspect, which was also evolving over time and I find quite interesting, is how we actually made product decisions. So the first thing that we focused on in the very beginning was community feedback. So when we started the game, we engaged with all the players. We had Skype calls with them. We asked them, so what do you think about the game? What do you like? And we then incorporated this into our decision making. And this is something that obviously works really well with the games as a service approach. As you're shipping new and new updates every week, you can then gather the feedback from your customers and then implement that feedback, which is, I believe, much better than building a product for 2 years, shipping it, and then realizing that people like it in a different way, but it's too late now because you already built it. And there's also one story from one real story that we had. So when we started Idle Miner Tycoon, in Idle Miner Tycoon, you build up your mining empire. Basically, you have one mine, then you have a continent, then you have a full world of mines. But obviously, we started with only one mine. And of course, we had so many ideas how the game should look like. And our initial idea for the game was that you stay in one mine, but it just gets more and more complex. You have more and more features within that mine. However, with all the players that we talked initially after releasing the game, everybody basically said like, okay, that's cool. I have my gold mine now, but I want more mines. So for us, we realized basically that our players do not want a more complex game, but they just want more of the same. because apparently they like building mines and they like digging deeper and completing them. So we decided to make a crucial decision to not make one mine more complex, but to have multiple mines of them, multiple mines for them. And this, if we would not have listened to the community feedback so closely, I think we would have made the very wrong decision back then and would have not been able to really turn away from that, because the game would have attracted a very different audience. So the lesson here for us was stay close to our players, really listen to them. Of course, like everybody will tell you the game is too hard or the prices are too expensive. You will always have this, but there will always be a very important learnings within your feedback from the community. Second aspect, qualitative decisions. So basically this means we played our game a lot, like crazy, and we played other games like crazy. And then we sat together and thought about what do we think will make a good game. And basically with those two areas, community feedback and qualitative decisions, we grew the company and grew the game. And the data-based approach, which I will talk in a second about, only started this year because we decided that the first two approaches are no longer enough to keep scaling, but we need a new approach. And with the data-based approach, basically what we're doing is we right now have roughly like a bit more than 1 million players every day, which means we have a lot of data of players. And before that, as I said, we decided what to do and we just did it. And of course, we listened to feedback and so on, but not on data. And now this year, we actually implemented a big data A/B testing platform. We're now able to roll out different changes to different players and see how they react to it, see how they perform, and then basically build a data-driven decision structure. So if you want to, we basically added from left to right, but also very important, we are still close to our community. We still listen to them. We engage with them very regularly to learn from them. And of course, like in the end, finding out how to do those things and working on them, and actually in the end, I think doing a good job of them was also one thing why Ubisoft was very interested in Kolibri as a company. Cool. So I want to talk a bit about our exit basically and how we joined Ubisoft, because when we were at this stage in our lives, basically at the end of last year, this was the first time for us. And we, of course, talked to a lot of entrepreneurs before and so on to put friends that we had and the bankers and so on. But of course, this is a thing that you maybe do once, 2 times, maybe 3 times in a life, but usually it's very unique. However, the stakes are very, very high. So it's not like you try it out and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, because it really does matter in this case. And there is all the things that we talked about with, or that I talked about with like lean development and so on. This doesn't work here. You cannot go with an MVP into an exit process. You need to have everything perfect and then join the discussions and sell the company. And that's why I decided to talk a bit about how such a process actually works in reality, or at least how it works for us, to give you some insight in case you will hopefully reach this point in a few years as well. Cool. So the first important thing is the why. Why did we join Ubisoft? For us, as I said, we wanted to build something really big. We wanted to build something long lasting. And at some point in our development, we realized the thing that we build is super cool, but to go on the next step, we need probably a really global player who's doing that for many, many years now. So we decided to start the process of looking for potential exit partners. However, the good thing here was that since we were growing, we were very strong from a financial standpoint, we didn't have to say yes. So it's not like we went in that process desperate, because everybody knew that if we don't like the offers, then we will just say no and continue on our own. And obviously this gives you a much better position to negotiate compared to if everybody knows that you will go bankrupt in 2 months if you don't sell, because then of course they will negotiate much, much harder, because you in the end will probably still have to accept it. All right, so how does such a process usually work? So we went through three stages. The first stage is the if phase. So do we really want to do this? What is basically the why behind it? Then the who phase. Who is the best match? How do we find such a company? Should we go maybe public instead? Should we look for a private equity company instead of a gaming company? And the third phase, then actually the how phase. and how do you actually sell a company. So basically in the final phase, after we decided we want to sell to a gaming company and we are ready for it, the way how this works is basically kind of like, maybe you can imagine it like Tinder. So basically in the very first step, you and then one important thing to add here, we work with an investment bank. So basically the process management, sending pitch decks back and forth was done by them. And we also hired a CFO purely for this purpose, who took care of the financial side. And then basically how this works in the first step, there the bank approaches typical targets, probably like 20 of them or so, who tend to be interested in acquiring gaming companies in the mobile space. And they basically ask them like, so are you interested in all, or is it nothing for you right now? Second step is when we basically were really involved for management presentations. So we had, I think, 5-6 companies visiting us in Berlin. And but of course, like, we didn't go into the office because such a process is super secret, but we went into a meeting room in a hotel to meet them. And we also flew to the West Coast, San Francisco and LA, to meet some companies that were based there. And we basically talked like half a day to a day with each of them to see if there's a fit or not. Then it gets more interesting. Then you need to find out like who's really who could be a really potentially good partner, who can actually pay and is willing to pay the price that you want, at least roughly, and who is just bluffing, who is just going with it to learn about you, because of course in this phase you basically show them all your data, so and who's just a time of waste of time. So basically in the filtering phase you need to evaluate who's serious. There the bank is super helpful because they did this before a lot of times, and we of course didn't. And you also don't want to filter out the wrong candidate. And one fun fact on this is, so basically Ubisoft, they already own a competitor of ours. So in the beginning, we were super hesitant to even meet them because we thought that they will use this learning from us and this data to just feed their own competitor, basically. So actually in the very first presentation, it was only me and not even the other two co-founders. And we basically drilled down the presentation and removed the roadmap and those things because we didn't want to give them anything like that they can use on their competitor. And luckily, we still did meet them because it turned out that they were actually really serious and that they believe in the space. So basically, the competitor was another idle gaming company. And then we kept on going with them. But in the beginning, it's very dangerous if you filter out the wrong candidate. At the same time, you can also not meet 30 companies and basically show them everything you have. So then the next step, term sheet. Basically there it's about like you get then the numbers and you get the structure. How does it work? Do you get everything up front? Do you, like we get a big number up front and then you get another amount over the years depending on how good you perform? How does it work? And this is also the negotiation phase. So basically in this phase, the bank usually talks to all of them. And for us, this phase was quite good. So in the end, the offers were much higher after we left this phase than before we entered it, because, and the goal here, of course, is to have multiple term sheets. So we had 3 term sheets, 3 companies that were really interested. And then the bank basically told each of them that they need to pay more. And in the end, it worked out. Of course, again, competition is everything. If you only have one company that is actually interested, then you will have a hard time negotiating with them. And then a lot, in the end, there comes the very, or rather boring, but very important part where you really talk about the contract, all the details. I think our contracts in it were like hundreds of pages with like what happens in the future, how does it work, what can we decide, what can they decide, and so on. So there, and of course, they also go through all the history and the due diligence that you have. Basically, like you remember the picture in our student apartment. They wanted to know who were the interns that worked back then. Did they have proper IP contracts, and so on. So it's really, really a lot of work. But of course, like you need to go through it. And however, at this phase, usually the deal should not fail. So if they don't find any red flags, then it goes through. And luckily for us, it worked out. And as you know, we joined Ubisoft. Cool. So what's next? As I already mentioned, we didn't sell everything. So we sold 75% of the company and 25% will be sold over the next 4 years. and the price for those 25% depends on the performance of the company. This means we will stay at Kolibri, we will keep running Kolibri Games and make sure that we grow and are a successful company, and to bring Kolibri Games on the next level with Ubisoft's help. Cool. Now I wanted to highlight 3 key learnings, which are, I think, important. Of course, there's a lot of more learnings, but I think that's enough for today. And the first learning is start a business, keep going, keep pushing. As I said, the first businesses that we had were really not good. And at some point when we started a new company, like people were laughing at us because we are already trying it and we failed already like 2-3 times. Of course, this is a very German mentality. And they asked us like, why aren't you going to McKinsey or whatever? You have good grades, they will probably take you. But we kept going, we didn't give up. And I think this is the important part, to keep going. Of course, you need to learn. If you don't learn from your mistakes and make the same mistakes again and again, then you will never be successful. But if you learn from it, really become better, I think you will be successful at some point. Then the second part is, like, once you have something that works, you need to scale it. And I think scaling it is actually quite hard because people tend to be comfortable with what they have, but you really need to keep pushing. You need to rethink the decisions that you did, learn from your mistakes, and then really get better at what you do, and do that fast. And the third aspect, of course, is you need to believe in people. You need to have the right people to do it. We would not have been here where we are today without all the Kolibris that joined us on the journey. We trusted them. We have some people who joined us as interns back in the days and are now on the leadership team. So you need to trust people. You need to give them tasks. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work out. That happens. But if you never trust anybody and always only rely on yourself or on your co-founders, you will not be able to scale and to build a really successful company, because then you will always be limited by your own time, and your day only has, depending on how hard you work, like 18 hours, 16 hours, whatever. But if you don't believe in people, you will not be able to go beyond that. Cool. So thank you all for listening. I think that's all from the presentation side. Now I'm happy to answer some of your questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Daniel. So I guess have some questions for you, and also opening up to the audience. It's like super amazing presentation, and thank you so much for sharing your insight. I guess one key, one question maybe to begin with is, what is your vision or dream for the future, like in terms of like having built Kolibri now, and you know, had this idea and dream to build an extremely successful company, and having made it, like what would you like? And
So that's actually a really good question, which I don't know yet myself. So basically, for the time being, I run Kolibri Games, and this is my main focus. However, at the same time, we also decided, like Janusz, Olli, and me, to basically invest the money that we earned with the exit together. We built a small family office where we now look a lot into, like, how do we actually manage the money. And one big focus there is startup investments. So for us, it's really fun, and really, it's really good to give back, to work with talented teams, to work with teams that are just at the start of their career. So we do a lot of startup investments. Of course, there's also more like traditional stuff happening there in terms of investing. Right now we're looking into crypto. So far we should have done this a few weeks ago, but we didn't. But maybe soon. So that's on like the kind of like family office side there. The interesting part is investing. But of course, for myself, I think at some point, once, I don't know, in 3-4 years, I will probably leave Kolibri Games. It will be handed over to somebody more fresh then. And for me, I believe I will probably found a new company. It's too soon now to think of what and how, but I think that just like, I don't know, going into retirement is not the right thing for me, because at some point, of course, I think most people, they need to do something. They need to add value to something. They need to feel that they have impact on something, no matter what it is. Some people do this by going and building an NGO. Some people do this by building new companies or whatever. But I think there needs to be something, at least for me, which I'm focused on. So basically, long answer short, I think in the future, you will see me around founding some new companies. but I really have no idea yet.
Amazing. And what kind of kept you going? Like you mentioned, early on, people were saying, hey, just join a consulting agency or maybe get a job. Like what kind of gave you that drive to keep going and realize, hey, we have something here, or we're going to build something really successful?
So I think drive always needs to come from inside yourself. I think it never really works if you have some people telling you like you should become more successful, you should do this, you should do that. However, at the same time, I think the people around you are still very important because they form you. So basically, I hung out with a lot of like very driven people at university. I was also in some like student groups that were super pushy. I met Janusz at some point. So I think my environment helped me a lot into thinking big, into really pushing and not just, I don't know, relaxing and watching Netflix all day. But I think most of my drive came from inside myself. And I'm also wondering, like, why is this? I don't really have an answer, but for me, what I know is I basically grew up in like a middle-class family. For my parents, money was always an issue. I learned as a kid that money was a restricting factor. Like we couldn't really go on a lot of occasions. When we went out for dinner, it was something super special. Like, and I basically ate dessert at home to not spend too much money. Like I back then, one drive for sure was to basically release this restriction of not being able to afford the things that I want to do. So I had always had this drive to be successful, to basically be the master of my own life and be able to decide what do I want to do. Do I want to work? Do I want to go on vacation? Do I want to, I don't know, have a nice home or not? And to, in the end, have the decision-making power for myself.
Amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. And we have a question here from Sasha. What was your happiest moment in building Kolibri?
So I think there are two moments. And the first moment was basically after we released the MVP. And then a few weeks later, we also added some monetization into it, or maybe 2 months later or so. And then suddenly we earned real money. So in the beginning, it was like $1,000 per day or so, which of course isn't enough to build a super big company. But for us back then in the student apartment, this was like, okay, this is it. Now we are actually, like, after all those years of hustling and trying everything out, now we have a company that really has the potential to be something. And basically this feeling of, okay, now we really, all the things that we did paid off. So I think this was the first very happy moment. And then the second happy moment was when we, in the end, basically signed with Ubisoft, and we knew like that all the value that we built is actually in safe hands now. It's realized. It's basically there are not a lot of things that can happen now that will destroy everything again, but it's basically in the safe harbor now. So, and I would say those are the moments were the happiest, because the first one was like the initial success, and then the second one was, and then a few years later, basically when we took the win home and could basically think like, okay, now this worked out and we did the right decisions. Of course, we could have been more successful. We could have done different things, but it's safe now.
Amazing. And a question here from Vamsi, like, what are the top reasons that made you to get a partner? So like, I guess a co-founding partner and also like a partner in Ubisoft.
Yeah, so on the co-founding side, I think it's really hard to found a company if you're alone. I think this only really works if you are a bit more senior, if you founded a company before, or if you managed a team before or so. But I think in the very beginning, you need people that you can bounce ideas off with. It. You need to have this positive feedback loop where you basically push each other, but also be very, very honest in telling each other if you think that something is not good, or if you think that you should change directions. I think if you found alone, it's super hard to basically get some feedback and not just work on yourself and work for 3 weeks on something that nobody really needs. And you also probably won't have this creative spirit around where you bounce ideas back and forth. And the second aspect there is, I think, like, once it's working, I think having a co-founder is super important to for like the stability, emotional stability. In the, like, once you have a team of 100 people, there will always be issues. Some people, they quit. Some people have their midlife crisis. Somebody's mom dies. And of course, like, if you're leading a company, all those things influence you in the end. You need to talk to your team. They trust you. They come to you if they have serious problems. And if you're alone, I think it's much, much harder to deal with all those problems compared to if you have a co-founding team where you then basically kind of like share the troubles and find solutions together. And then on the Ubisoft side, on why did we get a partner there? So basically two reasons. One reason was the financial aspect, both for us, but also for the team, because everybody in the company had virtual shares, everybody who worked there full time. So it was basically the promise for everybody that we will sell at some point and they will get a good paycheck. And this was really cool for a lot of people, especially the ones that joined earlier, because of course, like with virtual shares, same as usually with crypto projects, if you join earlier, the risk is much higher and your benefit is also higher. And then over time, like when we had the 100th employee, they still got shares, but of course, it wasn't a big amount anymore. But for some of the early joiners, it was a six-figure amount, which was really, really big for them. So this was the financial side, but also then on like the more like global gaming strategy side. So one example, it was important for us to get a global partner. One example is for us, it's super hard to work in China because China, as you know, tends to be very restrictive. And the game is live in China, but we were never really able to scale it there because we don't have anybody there. And Ubisoft has a studio in China. So now we're working with Ubisoft China to work there with like local companies to scale the game, to work with regulations and so on. So basically, this is one of the examples where you need a global partner to actually get on the next level.
That's awesome. And were there any like difficulties or obstacles along the way that held you back and you had to overcome? And like, how did you manage to do it?
So in general, we were very lucky in the fact that from a financial perspective, things always worked out and basically only went up. And I'm very thankful for that because, as you know, a lot of like startups, they have big problems. And then I also have some friends that founded startups that at some point didn't know how to pay salaries and so on, which is super stressful. And I'm lucky that we didn't have to experience it. From a business perspective, it worked out. But of course, as you grow the company, you need to change things in the structures and you will have growing pains. So for example, we had some people who are really valuable in the very beginning, but they either tended to not enjoy it anymore once the company became bigger. And of course, with a 50 people company, you will have middle management, you will have a different decision-making process than with 10 people. And some people also, they unfortunately weren't good enough anymore because they tended to be very like generalistic and they did everything in the beginning, but at some point you had like a specialist for this, specialist for that. So one good example there is, so for finance, office management, HR, for those support functions in the very beginning, you basically just start and you find somebody who does this all a little bit and you don't need an expert. But at some point you need a head of finance, you need office management, you need a head of HR who did HR before. And then the person from before doesn't fit anymore. And that's hard because, you know, it's not their fault, but there's also no solution for it. And of course, you try to find a role within the company and so on, but that's tough. So basically, I think the biggest challenge for the company was to evolve to who should become lead now, who should become the next manager. What do you do with people who basically were on the same level and suddenly you promote one of them to be the team lead? Like those growing pains, I would say, were the biggest challenges.
Amazing. And we have a question here from Yep. How do you prepare for, discuss, make strategic decisions between members of the management team meetings? Like, do you have special rituals or voting procedure? And like, how do you handle the emotional like aspect in decision making? And what about external facilitators in making decisions?
So basically, the way how we do this is usually we think about it before, what are our thoughts, and then if we have a strong opinion on something, then we go with this solution into the meeting. And if we don't really have a strong opinion, then basically we present our thoughts, but it's always guided. So we rarely go into a like strategy decision with the management meeting, with the management team without being prepared, because I think then this will create a lot of uncertainty and people will not enjoy this. So even if we don't have a solution, we will prepare our thinking, we will prepare some options, and then we will talk to people. For us, from our culture, we think, it's important for us that people agree in the end. So there are some companies who really don't care, where the CEO, like imagine Tesla, I think Elon Musk doesn't really care if somebody thinks he should not open a factory in Berlin. And it's obviously working. That's their culture. For us, our culture is we want everybody to be aligned. We want everybody to be on board. So we tend to talk a bit more, tend to, like, if we see that somebody's not really 100% aligned, then we ask them specifically. We try to make sure that they understand why we make this decision. But we don't really, but what we don't do is we never vote. I think voting is something that you should not start, because unless you want to really build a democratic company. Of course, like in the crypto universe, there are a lot of people who go this route. But I think once you start having votes, then you imply that it's a democracy, but it's not. So in the end, if we as founding team think we should go in this direction, everybody else thinks we should go that direction, then we should try out to find why do they think differently. But in the end, if we think we should still go this direction, we will do this, even if they outnumber us. So I would never vote in such a meeting, but I would try and talk, and you will get the feeling if people agree or not. So there's no reason to vote for something if you know that people will vote against it. But then our way how to do this is we talk with them about it. Maybe we stop the discussion at that point and go back to one-on-ones and see why they think that way, where they're coming from. But I would not vote. And we never had external facilitators for such meetings. So we have coaches and so on for like to prepare, to talk about, to get feedback. But in those meetings, we decided for us it's easier if it's only us. And one reason for that is because I think if there would be a facilitator in there, it would also be a bit weird for us. And then at some point, I think you take the power away from yourself, and it feels like then it feels more like it's a you against them situation. You have somebody in between. I believe this is not the right way to go in those directions or go in those meetings, because I think in the end, like if you are the CEO or founder, you are the one to make the decision. You are the one who will have to live with the decision. And at the same time, you are responsible to get everybody's feedback, to adjust your opinion if appropriate, and then make a decision.
Amazing. And we have a question here from Kat. How do you think gaming technology will evolve by 2030, gaming and blockchain and other aspects?
Yeah, it's very hard to foresee, to be honest. I can imagine that there will be some games, especially multiplayer games, who will build more on blockchain technology, because for them, they already have usually an in-game economy where people can trade things, where people can buy from each other. And there, of course, blockchain would be a natural technology to evolve this and to maybe make the system more open, also with projects like Unit. It's easy to imagine to have a system that works in the game, but also works outside the game. So I believe there will be games going in this direction. Yeah, but for me, it's quite hard to foresee. I think this will happen probably. I think there are already some games out there trying this. I think so far there's nothing big yet, but this will probably come. Beyond that, I don't know.
Awesome. We have a question here from Matthias. How do you feel about the Unit project or the Unit ecosystem or this community that we're building at marketplaces?
For me, it's quite new, very interesting. So I followed crypto like all the years, but I never really engaged with crypto and blockchain technologies. I find the system in itself very interesting. I still have my doubts if the Unit system, as you know, Michael, will work that way, or if it's in the end a bit too idealistic and people will not always be the best. But I think it's very interesting. I think it's important to try those things out, to push them forward, and also to push them forward properly, and not only like give up after one or two tries. Because even in the end, what I think will happen is that in the end there will be a solution that's somewhere in between. So I don't think that there will be a black or white solution. I personally don't believe that the whole society will basically change until then. But at the same time, still believe that there will be aspects of, for example, Unit projects or other blockchain technologies that will actually happen, and it will evolve the way how we as a society work together. So for me, I'm more like, I would say, in between.
Awesome. And like one thing you mentioned, which was super amazing and cool, is that you took good care of your employees and the team that helped you build this. Like, what inspired you to do this, and what was the thought process there?
So basically, the thought process was in the end that our own energy and time is limited, and we need good people to do the things to realize what we want to achieve in the end. And I think this doesn't work. And if you treat your people like shit, you will not get the best people. unless you, I don't know, overpay them crazy or do something else. But for us, we wanted to have a nice environment where everybody is nice to each other and who focuses on the human side. However, this is really important. At the same time, we were also quite tough on like actual resources and quite tough on like results, because for us it was very clear that we cannot achieve the things that we want to achieve if we don't push hard. So we never accepted like bad solutions. We never accepted people who were lazy or who didn't really want to push or who were not aligned and so on. So while we really focused a lot on treating people well, we also made sure that we only hire those people, and at the same time, if it still doesn't work out, that we need to let go of them. Luckily, this only rarely happened in those 4.5 years now. We, for example, never ended, we never had any legal dispute with somebody in the company, which is very rare on such a big scale. But for us, basically, the whole idea was to combine being very nice, being very human, but at the same time, with really focusing on results and making sure that people actually perform in the end.
Awesome, that's a really nice one. So a question from it says, how do you feel about VR games and like the Oculus platform, like in terms of development?
So it's a very interesting topic. VR has been around for 10, 20 years now, and everybody, or back then everybody said like 5 more years and it will have breakthrough. I personally believe that it will not be the case that everything will move to VR. I think for example, in gaming, the biggest chunk of games will still stay on like normal displays, mobile PC, console. And because I think VR will not enhance all those experiences. However, I also believe there will be some particular experiences in gaming where VR will really make a big change. But so far, I'm always waiting for when will be the big breakthrough for VR. But so far, there hasn't been really a big game with VR yet. So I believe it will still take multiple years until there will be something bigger. And I think once there's something bigger, then there will be follow-ups. And right now you have the issue that like there are not a lot of people having high-end VR gear. So it doesn't really make sense for AAA companies to build a big game for VR, because it's really, really expensive to build a game, and if nobody can buy it. So it's hard to solve one of those sides without having the other. And I think therefore it will take some time, but I also believe that there will be VR games and also big VR games in the future at some point.
Amazing. And like the exit process and insight that you shared was super, super amazing. We have a question here from Carl. Did you start the exit process by approaching the investment bank, and like what was that process like, and did they put you in a good shape?
So basically, with the investment bank, they at some point very early in our story of the company approached us just to like chat, and then we kept in touch with them, and they were actually super helpful even before we thought about selling. So they basically, and we didn't, and like before saying, we also didn't sign anything with them, but they made some introductions to us, they shared some learnings. So they were basically kind of like coaching us all the time. And at some point when we decided that we want to sell, it was clear for us that we will work with them. At the same time, in the gaming space, it's quite an easy decision because they are basically the go-to bank in the gaming space in Europe. They did most of the gaming deals in the last years. So it was also kind of like the obvious choice. So then at some point when we were ready, I basically texted the partner from the bank on WhatsApp, like, hey, we should talk. And then it rolled off.
Amazing. And a question here from Yip, and also what you explained earlier, like it's really nice how like you mentioned the first employees, the people that joined the company initially was really well rewarded. Like how did you like work out the distribution in terms of like all the people who joined later? Like how do you calculate things like this, where you really want to take care of your employees? And
so basically the way how our virtual stock options work were like from the beginning, everybody who joined full-time got certain options. Those depended on the position. So more important people for the company got more shares, but also, and this was the bigger factor, on the timing. So people who joined very early got a higher amount of shares. However, one thing that's very important is we had vesting. So people who left the company before the exit, since the exit was before 4 years for everybody, I think, who got ESOPs, basically everybody who left earlier lost their shares, which was, I think, fair, because they basically didn't, they weren't loyal and didn't contribute to the full success. So basically this means that a lot of the shares that we initially handed out didn't even realize because people decided they don't like Berlin, or they wanted to go to a competitor because they poached them or whatever. And basically then you have this like power curve in the end. It's not like what probably, so it wasn't a democratic distribution in the end. I think roughly like 5 million or so, 4 to 5 million were paid in ESOPs, which is quite a high amount for ESOPs. I think one of the highest relative distributions for German startups. But at the same time, it's of course the biggest amount was still, the biggest share was still on the founder side.
Amazing. And a question here from Aline. How far can you consider integrating games into things like media and TV, like game shows on
So for us, with the type of games we do, I think this doesn't really make sense because our games are more like simulation heavy. They are not really fun to watch. So for us, it's tough, but I think there will be more in this direction. There are some cloud gaming companies who focus not so much on the end device, but more like on the game itself. And you can play it from wherever. There are some ideas to basically have games where streamers can interact with the game and so on. So I think there will be interesting things coming in the next 5 years. But unfortunately, for the type of games we build, this is not relevant.
And how did you kind of think about the concept? Was it something that I guess the co-founders kind of just thought about and realized, hey, you know, this was something like an opportunity, or was it like an evolution with a, like if Joe asked, were there many games before the success which you built, or like what was the early days?
Basically, we built in the very beginning, we never built a game before. So we had the idea to build one super big game, 10 versus 10 multiplayer on mobile. And we started with it, and after 2 or 3 months, we realized this is never going to work because it's so much too big. And nowadays, I know that like those projects that we imagined, they're usually done by like 200 people over 3 years. So this didn't work for us. But then in the meantime, we learned how to build games, and we looked a lot on the market, basically by playing a lot of games. And then at some point, like we thought, like, why isn't there like a game like Idle Miner Tycoon where you have always like the idle mechanics with the progression, but also very accessible, very nice graphics and the world building element. So we thought there should be such a game. And this was our hypothesis. And luckily with the MVP, then we proved that people actually want this. But basically in the end, it was a mix between having a market approach where we looked at what is working, what are people playing, but also playing games on our own.
Amazing. I mean, the graphics are great. I also like the music. I think the music is a really nice touch there. And I guess it's a really competitive space, like mobile gaming, and especially idle gaming. Like how did you manage to differentiate and market and grow and scale? Like
usually if you build mobile games, you need to do advertising, otherwise you will not get downloads. Back when we started, we were naive and we didn't even know of that. So basically we just started, and we were really, really lucky because Idle Miner Tycoon got organic downloads. So we basically didn't have to start with marketing. But this is like 1 out of 100 games do this. I think for us, like one of the reasons why we had this was because we actually went into a new market and people actually wanted those kind of games. So they were searching for them. For most games, there's already something similar out there. So there's no chance to have organic success, but you need to do performance marketing. So basically ads on Facebook and other platforms all day long. And at some point, like we also started with that. And this is when we really took off as a company. But in the very beginning, we got lucky that we found a game that people looked for and searched for themselves and downloaded it.
Amazing. And like you mentioned the community side, so like people building simulators or on Reddit, like how important is community in building a technology company or product or a game?
So I think community is really important in the end, of course, because those are the players. However, it's two-sided because usually, so with the example of Reddit, on Reddit, you tend to have the most vocal players, and Reddit, as you know, is typically like more on the hate side of things. So sometimes, for example, we release a new feature and we see that most players interact with it, they like it. And then on Reddit, you have somebody really hating about it and saying like, this is just because we were bought by Ubisoft and some conspiracy theories or whatever. So I think community is super important, but at the same time, you need to really think about what is your community, and are the haters on Reddit your community, or are your community the people that play your game every day? And so it's very hard to basically see who's just vocal and who really who's basically the biggest part of the game.
Amazing. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I suppose one question is, like, as an entrepreneur and someone who's built like a huge company which is extremely successful, what like key pieces of advice like really helped you along this journey? Because you shared like a number of key learnings. Like, what's one that like really?
So I would say the key learning for me was to keep learning. And there are multiple ways to do this. For example, one thing that we do is we read a lot of books and also audiobooks, like all the management books that we could find. At some point, Janusz and I had a challenge where we had the goal to read one book a week for the full year. We did this as well, and then we kept going with it because it's so important to keep learning. I think books are the key factor to have deep learning. And but there are of course like a lot of other ways to learn by talking to people, by exchanging with other entrepreneurs that are a step ahead and had the issues that you are encountering before, by hiring coaches and trainers and so on. But for me, I would say the key way to learn, and this is also something that's super easy, everybody can do, is by reading a lot.
Amazing. And do you think everyone has what it takes in terms of to be able to build a successful business or a project, and or like was it something that you think you've kind of learned and sort of?
So to be honest, I think founding companies is not for everyone. I think there are a lot of people who will not enjoy this because while there's a big benefit on one side if you're successful, there's also a big downside of like you always need to decide, you're always in charge. You can never relax. You can't go on vacation for 2 weeks and not be reachable. This does not work. And so I think there you really need to be willing to go this route for many, many years. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, I think there are a lot of other jobs that are just better suited, or maybe you start early in a startup as like the first employee or whatever. But I think founding is not for everybody. You really need to know what the trade-off is that you are doing, and you need to be willing to do this for a long time.
And what are the key traits that you think determine like successful entrepreneurs? Is it grit? Is it like discipline? Like, is it?
So I think the interesting thing there is there's not one blueprint for entrepreneurs. If you think of like, if you look at a lot of founders, you will realize they are very different in what they do. There are very different types of founders. So there are some founders who are super visionary, like thinking of Steve Jobs, for example. And there are some founders who are super hardworking, like Elon Musk, who's sleeping in the factory and running 3 companies at the same time. But there are also some other founders who are more like people focused and who basically are super good at managing people. So there was not one thing, but I think in the end, one thing that is really important are the things that you mentioned, like grit, discipline, working hard. I think without this will never work, because founding companies is always a competition against other founders, against other companies. And if you don't really focus on it and give it all your best, the chances of success are very low.
Amazing. One question from Kat. Did you come across any ethical decisions during the development design, and how do you manage that?
So not really. I think in the end, the good thing for mobile gaming is people can play for free. You can reach everything for free. Of course, like we monetize, we have ways for people to spend money, but in the end, I'm a big believer in that people should decide on their own if they want to spend or not. And Idle Miner Tycoon especially, like we don't have like gambling or anything. So we never really had a good, we never really had a hard decision.
Awesome. And question, do you have any book recommendations? Like you mentioned, like some management books and things like that.
So I think one book that every entrepreneur should read is Lean Startup. It's already quite a long time out, but I think this would be number one. Number two, I think, Atomic Habits is one book that I read this year, which is super important. It's not so much about business, it's more about like yourself. And the third book I would say is The Hard Things About Hard Things from, I think it's Mark Horowitz, which is basically about the entrepreneur journey, and that there will not be one answer for everything, but there will be different answers for different questions.
Amazing. I guess time for one final question. Thank you so much for your time, Daniel. Is what kind of skill shortage is there in your industry or company?
I would say the skill shortages are mainly focused on like the marketing business side, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs, gamers who go into the industry because they like and enjoy games. But of course, in the end, it's still a business, and you need to understand how the financial mechanics work and also how marketing works. Because in reality, people don't download games because they look hours for the app store, but because they see an ad and they decide, okay, let's play it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Daniel. I think I'm super grateful. I think all of us here are super grateful and appreciative for your insight and advice and sharing your journey. I look forward to continue this conversation. Now we're just gonna have breakout rooms for some of the people in our youth unit participant program, and Daniel, feel free to stay around. I think we're gonna just gonna pass the time over to Yip here, who's going to be continuing. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much for listening. Unfortunately, I can't join. I have another meeting still running the company. So, but thank you very much and have a nice evening. Bye.
Cool.